I survived an 18-month plot where my daughter-in-law secretly slipped sedatives into my coffee every morning to turn me into a demented old man. She wanted to steal my house, my pension, and put me in a nursing home forever. But instead of being a victim, I turned myself into a hunter, collecting evidence, confession after confession, until the day I handcuffed her in front of my whole family. This is not just a story of betrayal. This is a story of how a 70-year-old man turned the tables and proved that justice still exists. If you want to know the whole truth and the most dramatic turn of events that Christmas morning, please click like, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next shocking stories. The bitter scent of coffee, sweetened just enough with cream, curled through the room like a lullaby meant to keep me docile. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly, each second like a countdown to the moment my consciousness would once again be stolen. I sat perfectly still in my armchair, pretending the sedative was still working, while the shadows of the living room stretched long across the walls under the dim lamp. Every time Vanessa smiled, I felt like a wind-up doll, something fragile, mechanical, built to obey. My daughter-in-law had been poisoning me for 18 months. I discovered it on December 22nd. Vanessa thought I was dozing, slumped in that same armchair she'd placed beside the window, when she leaned close to my son. Her voice was a whisper, sharp and deliberate. "We'll move him out after Christmas," she said. "I've already called Shady Oaks. They're holding a bed." "You're sure about this?" Michael asked softly. "Look at him," she hissed. "Drooling like an idiot. The medication works perfectly. Once he's committed, we'll get full guardianship. The house will be ours, $950,000, clean and clear." I clenched my jaw so tightly it hurt, feeling every heartbeat like a small drum in my chest. I forced my breathing to remain steady while rage burned through me like wildfire. She had no idea that I'd been dumping that coffee for weeks, or that I'd been recording every word she spoke. In that silence, I heard the quick, nervous rhythm of their breathing. I imagined Eleanor Margaret, her gentle hands pouring tea on quiet mornings, her laughter drifting through this same room before illness took her. When Vanessa said, 950,000, the number hung in my mind like a dark storm cloud, blotting out every memory of peace we'd ever built here. But my anger wasn't loud. It was cold and precise, the kind that shapes plans instead of words. I had already begun building my record of proof: the fake coffee stains on the table, the faint ring left by a cup I only pretended to drink, the sealed jar in the cabinet that held every poisoned drop she thought I'd swallowed. Before leaving the room earlier that week, I'd photographed the label she'd carelessly left on the counter, catching the faint residue of crushed pills glinting beneath the light. Each small act became another brick in my quiet rebellion. Vanessa straightened her dress and said softly, "Don't worry, everything's taken care of. We're just doing what needs to be done." And Michael, his voice trembling, asked, "You'll take care of him, right? You won't go too far?" I let out a dry, almost inaudible sound. I murmured, just enough for them to think I was too far gone to understand. I thought of the pen in my breast pocket, the one I used to jot down dates, pill bottle numbers, and bank withdrawals. I'd started marking each coffee lid with the date, black ink scrawled like a witness statement written by a man fighting for his own sanity. Beneath my sweater, the small red light of my recorder blinked faintly, a secret star burning beneath layers of deceit. In the corner, the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence after their whispers faded. Outside, the wind scratched against the window like a warning. I told myself that when the time came, I would be ready not just to survive, but to strike back. If you've ever watched someone you trusted destroy your life while smiling to your face, then you already know what comes next. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or violent, it's patient. It's letting the wicked tighten the rope around their own neck. The blood test results would change everything. But before that day arrived, they still didn't know that I'd turned every cup of coffee into evidence and every breath I took into a promise. Justice would be served. The morning after we buried Margaret, the house felt hollow, eerily too quiet. The armchair where she used to sit knitting still held her half-finished scarf, a strand of yarn hanging loose like a breath she never took again. The long dining table stood set for two, though now only one cup of coffee steamed faintly on the surface. The bitterness on my tongue blended with the emptiness in my chest. That was when it all began. Vanessa had been helpful in those final months of Margaret's illness, too helpful, perhaps. She brought breakfast to my study every morning on a silver tray, complete with a steaming cup of coffee and a slice of buttered toast, just the way Margaret used to make it. "You need to take care of yourself, Dad," she'd say softly, her voice dripping with affection. I believed her. God help me, I believed her. At first, her gestures felt comforting, almost filial. She'd hover near my armchair, tidy the blanket folded at my side, and pat my hand, a touch meant to soothe but leaving a faint chill instead. Sometimes she'd glance at Margaret's photograph on the mantel and sigh, as if mourning beside me. Other times, her eyes would linger on the framed deed to the house longer than on the picture of my late wife. By April, something was wrong. Every morning, around 10 o'clock, the same crushing exhaustion swept through me, as though someone had siphoned the life from my veins. My eyelids grew heavy, leaden, the words in my books blurred into nothing. Once, I tried to read a familiar passage from The Old Man and the Sea, but after one line, I couldn't remember what it said. My thoughts drifted, slippery as smoke, and I would sit for hours staring at the same spot on the wall without realizing time had passed. At dinner, I would begin a sentence and forget where it was going. My fork trembled between my fingers, clinking softly against the plate. I saw the exchanged glances across the table, pity disguised as concern. Vanessa always took the lead, sighing dramatically before speaking. "He's grieving," she'd say gently to the family. "It's the sadness, and his age, of course. He's nearly 70 now. 69. I wanted to correct her. I still had my mind, even if my tongue had forgotten how to obey. But my throat felt tight, my voice too weary to rise. So I stayed silent, and my silence became her weapon. Sometimes, when I tried to protest, my tongue tangled, turning words into broken sounds. Vanessa would lay a hand on my shoulder and murmur, "Shh, it's all right," the way one speaks to a child or a patient who's lost his senses. The others would nod, believing her compassion was genuine. I watched their eyes fill with sympathy for the woman caring for me. Each morning, she placed that same cup of coffee beside me, the same blend Margaret once used, sweetened perfectly, comforting, familiar. And every morning, by 10, the fog rolled in again, thick, suffocating, absolute. I was 69, old enough to know when something was being stolen from me, yet too exhausted to fight it. My world had shrunk to the rhythm of the ticking clock and the bitter taste of coffee cooling on my tongue. What I didn't know then was that the poison wasn't grief, it was her. From that spring onward, every trip to the clinic became a performance I didn't audition for. Vanessa insisted on accompanying me, shadowing me each time. She would sit close, arms folded neatly in front of her like a warden more than a companion. The scent of her perfume, sweet, sharp, and deliberate, hung in the air between us, reminding me that even silence could be weaponized. When we arrived at Dr. Alan Gray's office, I was already dizzy from the morning coffee. As the doctor flipped through my file, Vanessa leaned forward, lowering her voice into a soft, sorrowful tone. "He's been so confused lately," she said. "His memory's slipping faster than we expected." I caught the faint scratch of the doctor's pen against paper. My mouth opened to protest, to say that I'd never once forgotten to turn off the stove, but my tongue tangled, the words dissolving into incoherent murmurs. Vanessa's hand came to rest on my shoulder, not gentle but firm, a reminder of where control now lay. "Tell the doctor about the stove, Dad," she prompted, her smile fixed like a mask. I shook my head weakly. I didn't, but my sentence died halfway. Dr. Gray glanced at me over his glasses, sympathetic but detached, the way one looks at a patient already lost to decline. He made another note. In that moment, I realized I was no longer a man being examined. I was evidence, a living exhibit of Vanessa's carefully crafted story. By June, her control moved from my health to my finances. One humid afternoon, Vanessa laid 3 crumpled bills on the kitchen counter with an exasperated sigh. "You forgot to pay these again, Dad," she said. The papers looked foreign addresses, slightly smudged, due dates inconsistent, like something forged from bits of real mail. I was sure I had never seen them before. Michael furrowed his brow. "Dad, maybe you should let us help with this stuff. You've been distracted lately." My chest burned with humiliation. I wanted to shout that I never missed a payment, that those bills weren't mine, but my head spun, and the words clung to the roof of my mouth like syrup. Vanessa's face softened in false sympathy as she slid the bills toward my son. "It's all right," she said sweetly. "He's doing his best. We just want to make sure everything's taken care of." Then, with a practiced motion, she reached into my desk drawer and retrieved my checkbook, her manicured finger tracing its edge as if she were reacquainting herself with something that had always belonged to her. "From now on," she continued, "let me handle the monthly expenses. It'll take the pressure off." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes, sharp and gleaming, met mine with quiet defiance, daring me to object. The air between us grew heavy with unspoken tension. Michael hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "Maybe that's a good idea," he muttered, not quite meeting my gaze. "Just until you feel better, Dad." Vanessa smiled faintly, victorious. "Exactly. We're only looking out for you." I could hear the rustle of paper, the faint rip of a check being torn from the book. I wanted to tell them that the only thing slipping wasn't my memory, it was my freedom. But I said nothing. And in that silence, she won her first battle. My pension came to $3,200 a month. The house was paid off. Margaret and I had spent 4 decades pinching every penny to clear that mortgage. Our life had been built on discipline. Every receipt filed, every expense logged in a little blue ledger she kept by the phone. But now, when I opened my wallet, there were only a few wrinkled bills staring back at me. The ledgers that once tracked our careful spending were blank, as if the years of thrift had been erased overnight. By all logic, my monthly expenses shouldn't have exceeded $1,800. Even with utilities, groceries, and the occasional medical bill, I should have had at least $1,400 left over. Yet at the end of every month, my balance was a riddle, empty, fading, devoured by some unseen hole. It was one of those humid August mornings when suspicion finally slipped through the cracks of my fogged mind. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the latest statement from the bank, the numbers bleeding together like smudged ink. "Vanessa," I asked, my voice hoarse, "where's all my money going? My pension comes in steady, same as always, but by the 3rd week, there's nothing left. Nothing." She placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of me and sat down, her tone calm and rehearsed, as if reading from a script she'd written long ago. "Medications are expensive, Dad," she said. "Your body needs more support now than it used to. You're on several prescriptions." I blinked. "Prescriptions?" Her eyes softened with artificial sympathy. "Of course, you probably just forget. That's normal. The Ambien alone costs $84 a month." The spoon froze in my hand. "Ambien," I repeated. The word sounded foreign, like something I'd overheard in a stranger's conversation. My stomach tightened. I had never in my life taken Ambien, not one pill. Not once. Vanessa leaned back, her expression unreadable. "Yes, that's the one Dr. Gray prescribed to help you sleep." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that no doctor had ever given me such a prescription, but the air felt thick and heavy. My mind pulsed dully, the edges of thought blurring like a wet painting. Somewhere inside the haze, I could almost hear Margaret's voice whispering, "Don't believe everything you're told, Frank." That was the first fracture in the story they'd built around me, the first hairline crack in a structure of lies that would one day collapse under its own weight. I tried to stand, to go to the medicine cabinet and see for myself, but my limbs felt filled with sand. My vision swam. The cup of coffee still sat untouched in front of me, its steam curling upward like a warning I couldn't quite decipher. I wanted to ask again, to press her, but my tongue felt sluggish. Vanessa smiled faintly. sipping her own coffee. "Don't worry about it, Dad," she said sweetly. "You just focus on resting." I nodded numbly, though every instinct screamed otherwise. That was the day I first realized something was deeply, dangerously wrong, and that the truth was dissolving in my coffee. By October, the narrative Vanessa had built around me had spread beyond the walls of my own home. It seeped into the neighborhood, into the air itself. Mrs. Parker, the woman who'd lived next door for 20 years, began avoiding my gaze when we met by the mailbox. That morning, she stood there clutching a stack of envelopes to her chest, her eyes darting to the pavement as though afraid to make contact with a man she now thought was losing his mind. "I'm so sorry about Frank," she murmured to Vanessa in a tone thick with pity. "Early onset dementia, that's just heartbreaking." "We're managing," Vanessa replied smoothly, her voice the perfect blend of weariness and grace. "Some days are better than others." I stood a few feet away, the chill cutting through my sweater. I wanted to shout that there was nothing wrong with my mind, that the fog was not confusion but poison, but when I opened my mouth, all that came out were fractured, trembling sounds, like static on a broken radio. Vanessa turned to me, offering a sad smile before taking me gently by the arm, guiding me back toward the house, as if I were a fragile patient instead of her father-in-law. The isolation wasn't accidental, it was engineered. The weekly poker nights I'd hosted for nearly 15 years slowly dissolved. My seat at the table sat empty, the deck gathering dust, the laughter I used to hear replaced by silence. The library book club where Margaret and I once spent our Saturdays still kept my old bookmark tucked inside an unfinished novel, but Vanessa had told them I was no longer capable of following the plots. "It's too much stimulation for him," she'd said. Even my brother Mark, who hadn't missed a single Sunday visit in decades, stopped coming by. "He's been unpredictable lately," Vanessa confided to him in hushed tones. "It's safer to give him some space." Mark, kind and cautious, believed her. So did my son. At home, Michael nodded sympathetically as Vanessa spoke, his hand resting on her shoulder, not realizing that the very hand he sought comfort from was the one tightening its grip around our family. "They say he gets restless," she told him. Restless. They used that word as if it were a symptom, not a scream. I wasn't restless. I was powerless, watching my own life being dismantled, piece by piece, while everyone applauded the woman who was stealing it. By November, she had convinced them that I could no longer be trusted on my own. "He left the gas stove on Tuesday," she told Michael over dinner. A lie. "And yesterday," she continued, lowering her voice, "I found him wandering the neighborhood in his pajamas." Another lie, perfectly timed. When I shuffled downstairs at noon, dizzy from whatever she'd laced into my coffee that morning, I found them huddled in the living room, whispering anxiously about my decline. My son's eyes brimmed with worry, Vanessa's with victory. The story of my supposed dementia spread faster than truth ever could. Neighbors looked at me with a blend of sorrow and unease. I could feel their glances sticking to my back as I walked down the street, the way one might watch a dangerous animal pacing behind glass. Thanksgiving arrived a night that had once been about gratitude and warmth. The smell of roasted turkey still lingered in the air when Vanessa set her knife down and spoke evenly, her tone wrapped in false compassion. "Maybe," she said, looking around the table, "it's time we start considering a memory care facility for his own safety, of course." Silence followed, thick and suffocating. The only sound came from the faint clinking of cutlery against plates, a quiet, unspoken agreement. And in that hollow silence, I knew, the next move was mine. Because 3 weeks earlier on November 1st, I had already made a decision that would save my life. 3 weeks before everything unraveled on November 1st, I made the decision that saved my life. It happened almost by accident. That morning, I reached across the counter for my glasses, and my elbow caught the rim of the coffee cup. The dark liquid spilled over the edge, spreading across the tiles like a thin pool of blood. Vanessa rushed over, feigning concern. "Dad, you've got to be more careful," she said, her voice soft but edged with annoyance. She crouched down to wipe the mess, her movements brisk, controlled. Within seconds, she was brewing another cup, her back turned, shoulders tight. But I was already late for my appointment with Dr. Alan Gray. When she handed me the new cup, steam curling upward like a silent command, I forced a tired smile and slipped into my coat. "I'll drink it on the way," I said, and walked out the door. 4 hours later, as I drove back from the clinic, something extraordinary happened. It was as though a fog had lifted from inside my skull. My thoughts were sharp, precise. For the first time in months, I could remember the license plate of the red sedan parked outside, the exact words of the nurse chatting by the elevator, even the smell of disinfectant in the hallway. Clarity returned so suddenly that I gripped the steering wheel just to steady myself. That night, I decided to test it. When Vanessa brought me my evening coffee, I waited until she turned away, then tilted the cup over the sink. The liquid swirled down the drain with a low hiss, like the house itself exhaling a secret. I filled the cup halfway with tap water, gave it a gentle swirl to create a thin foam on top, and lifted it to my lips as if taking a sip. She smiled from across the kitchen, none the wiser. Then I waited. No exhaustion, no dizziness, no wandering thoughts dissolving mid-sentence. My body felt alive, my mind sharp, my pulse steady. That night, I picked up my old leather notebook and wrote a few lines. The handwriting, once shaky, was firm again, the words aligned neatly. I realized, with a jolt of awe and dread, that I was back. The next morning, I repeated the ritual. I dumped the coffee, added water, pretended, and by the third day, it was undeniable. The fog had been fabricated, the sickness engineered. For months, I'd believed the haze was grief, some cruel echo of losing Margaret. But now I knew better. Each dose of comfort Vanessa brought to me was, in truth, a quiet weapon. She wasn't just siphoning my pension or forging my bills. She was dismantling me piece by piece, my memory, my autonomy, my right to exist as a thinking man. And so, every morning after that, as I lifted the cup to my lips, I no longer felt fear, only purpose. Because while she thought she was drugging me into silence, I was quietly waking up one sip of water at a time. But I needed proof, real proof, evidence that would stand up in court and strip Vanessa's mask off in front of my entire family. Late one gray afternoon, heart pounding like a schoolboy hiding contraband, I drove to Best Buy. The automatic doors whooshed open, and the sterile smell of electronics wrapped around me. I kept my head down, chose a small Sony digital recorder no bigger than a deck of cards, and paid $89 in cash. The clerk barely looked up, but to me it felt like smuggling a weapon out of enemy territory. When I slipped it into my coat pocket, the weight was shocking, like tucking a pistol into my chest, like carrying a silent witness to war. Vanessa had forgotten who she was trying to script into her story. For 38 years, I'd stood at a lectern teaching students how to deconstruct deception, to read subtext, to recognize the mechanics of manipulation. I had taught them to see the cracks in a narrative and pry it open. She picked the wrong man to turn into a character. This time, I would be the author, and she the plot twist. The plan required perfect timing, but first, I had to capture exactly what she was slipping into my coffee every morning. Blood tests were only the first chapter. The next would be sound her own words. December 5th, a Tuesday morning. Vanessa believed I was slumped in my armchair, drugged as usual, drooling into an empty cup. I tilted my head to one side, eyes half closed, saliva pooling at the corner of my mouth, a grotesque performance I'd never imagined acting out in my own home. My fingers brushed the inside of my sweater pocket, where the tiny red LED pulsed beneath the fabric like a second heartbeat. From the kitchen, her voice drifted back, low and precise. "The attorney says we need 3 sets of medical records. No questions asked, no loopholes." A pause, then a hiss of paper. "Dr. Alan Gray already signed off. Franklin shows clear signs of cognitive decline. I've told him about the gas stove, the wandering at night completely fabricated, but he didn't question it." I kept my breathing slow and even, gripping the armrest hard enough for my nails to press crescents into my palm. "Next week Dr. Cole Harper will see him. she continued. "I've already briefed him. The third signature should be easy. I found a neurologist who specializes in these cases." A shiver shot down my spine, colder than the Minnesota winter pressing against the windows. This wasn't about the house anymore. This wasn't about pension checks or forged bills. This was about erasing me from my own legal existence, having me declared incompetent, stripping me of my name, my autonomy, my very standing as a human being. She had no idea that the man she thought was slipping away was in fact recording every word. The red light blinked on, steady and merciless, writing the first lines of the story that would undo her. "One court order," Vanessa murmured, her voice cold and calculating, "and everything transfers: the house, his pension, and the life insurance payout from poor Margaret's death." I could hear every number rolling off her tongue like hammer blows, pounding against the legacy Margaret and I had built together. "Michael doesn't suspect a thing," she continued, walking across the living room. "He thinks we're the devoted caregivers. The life insurance, $50,000, will cover the transition until we sell the house. Can you believe it? $950,000, nearly $1 million for this old place." Her tone quivered with excitement, so different from the gentle, dutiful voice she used when my son was around. Then, silence. I could feel her gaze lingering, checking whether I was still asleep. I kept my breathing shallow and even. "The care facility is perfect," she whispered. "Shady Oaks Memory Center. Once he's committed, we can visit twice a year, play the grieving family, and move to Florida like we planned." Florida. The word tasted like poison. In my mind, I saw sterile corridors and hollow-eyed residents slumped in wheelchairs at Shady Oaks, abandoned souls fading into the background hum of fluorescent lights. That was the future she had reserved for me, a living ghost she could drain without consequence. That night, while she was out at her so-called book club, the same club she claimed was too stimulating for my fragile mind, I went into her room. My hands trembled as I unzipped her leather purse. The faint scent of expensive perfume rose from inside, the kind I knew Michael's modest paycheck could never afford. Inside were neatly folded real estate listings, 3 glossy brochures for luxury condos in Sarasota, Florida. Red ink circled units near the beach, the kind with rooftop pools and ocean views. I could almost picture her there, sipping wine in the sun, while I rotted away under professional care. Then, tucked behind a stack of cheap romance novels, I found the brown manila folder. My pulse pounded in my ears as I pulled it free. Inside were completed forms awaiting only my forged signature, power of attorney papers, a medical commitment order to Shady Oaks dated January 3rd, and a hand-drawn timeline written in Vanessa's immaculate handwriting. Each date was precise, methodical, merciless. December 1st to 15th. Obtain doctor's opinions. December 16th to 25th. Act normal. Celebrate Christmas. Don't upset Michael. December 26th to 31st. File court paperwork. January 3rd. Commitment. January 15th. Power of attorney hearing. February 1st. Close on the house. March 1st. Florida. The neatness of her script was chilling, each line a dagger cloaked in civility. Reading it, I realized that my entire life had been converted into a transaction sheet, a business plan to erase me and cash out my existence. 70 years of memory, love, labor, and dignity, all reduced to bullet points in Vanessa's flawless handwriting, waiting to be executed like a corporate merger. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, spoon hovering over a bowl of oatmeal I pretended to struggle with. Across the room, Vanessa's voice floated through the air, steady, composed, and cruelly calm. "Dr. Cole Harper has confirmed," she said into the phone. "Franklin's appointment is set for December 15th. I already told him about the bathroom incidents and the violent outbursts." Bathroom incidents. Violent outbursts. Those words hit like cold water on the back of my neck. Eleanor, my Margaret, used to laugh that I was the kind of man who folded towels into perfect squares and checked the stove twice before bed. And now this woman was describing me as some helpless old man losing control of his body. The lies were no longer simple, they were layered, rehearsed. each one built upon the last like chapters in a novel she was writing behind my back. That evening, I caught another whisper from her as she paced the hallway, phone pressed close to her ear. "Michael's starting to ask questions," she said. "He thinks maybe his father just needs a new prescription, but we're too close to turn back now." Then her voice softened, almost dreamy. "I've already put down the deposit for the Sarasota condo." A deposit? Those two words struck harder than any accusation. In my mind, I could hear the sound of paper tearing, the soft scratch of a pen signing my name, one of the pension checks that had mysteriously disappeared. $20,000. That was Margaret's legacy, the college fund for our grandson Ethan. She had stolen it to fund her Florida fantasy. "The memory care facility wants $4,800 a month," she continued. "Insurance will cover half. Once we sell the house, we'll be fine." Fine. She said it like it was nothing. Like my 40 years of sweat and teaching, the home Margaret and I had built together brick by brick were just another column in her accounting ledger. That afternoon, Vanessa appeared again, her voice dripping honey. "Here you go, Dad. Just the way you like it, extra sweet." I waited until she turned away. The coffee steamed under the kitchen light, but as I tilted the cup, I saw it a thin film of white powder clinging to the bottom, glittering faintly like crushed glass. I touched a fingertip to the residue, brought it to my tongue. Bitter, chalky. My stomach turned. That wasn't sugar. Calmly, I walked to the corner of the living room and poured the coffee into a glass jar I'd hidden behind the armchair. The lid clicked shut with a sound that felt final. November 2nd, sample number 1. The next morning, the ritual continued. Vanessa hummed softly at the counter, crushing something with the back of a spoon while she thought I was reading the newspaper. I caught a flash of a small prescription bottle before she tucked it into her purse. When she left, I repeated the motion, poured the coffee into another jar, sealed it tight, labeled it in careful handwriting. November 3rd, sample number 2. The faint pop of the lid echoed in the quiet kitchen. 2 jars now sat side by side inside my desk drawer, silent witnesses, holding the truth in liquid form. They looked ordinary, but to me, they were everything. My first 2 pieces of evidence, the foundation of the case that would shatter every lie, every manipulation, every word that woman had ever used to rewrite my life. By December 10th, my hidden archive had begun to look like a small evidence lab. 5 glass jars stood in a perfect row inside the cabinet, their labels written in red ink with a trembling but deliberate hand. They were like 5 silent witnesses, each holding a part of the story no one yet believed. Alongside them, on my desk, lay the digital recorder. Inside it, 47 minutes of sound. Whispers, the shuffle of papers, the faint click of metal against tile. Not just noise, a seamless audio indictment, ready to explode in court. It was on December 12th that I captured the darkest of them all. That night, I sat at my desk with headphones on. Vanessa Reed Walker's voice poured straight into my ears, thin and sharp as a needle, colder than any Minnesota winter I had lived through. She was on the phone with someone I still couldn't identify, but her tone was unmistakable, no longer the syrupy caretaker but a conspirator savoring her own plan. "The most beautiful part," she said, her words almost gleeful, "is that Franklin will never even know what's been done to him." I froze. Every syllable landed like a blade. I had to stop the playback twice just to breathe, my hands shaking above the recorder before I pressed play again. "By the time he realizes what's happening," she continued, "he'll already be locked away in the memory care wing with no legal rights left. And even if he tries to tell someone, who would believe a senile old man?" Then she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not even a cruel chuckle, a full, delighted laugh, as if she'd just tied up the last ribbon on a gift. And then came the part that chilled me to my core. "What quality of life does he even have now?" she murmured. "Ever since Margaret died, he's been sitting there, pitying himself. At least when he dies, there'll be money left to do something useful." My death. In that instant, I understood. She wasn't merely trying to strip me of my home or my pension. She had put a price on my life itself, calculating the payout from Margaret's insurance as if it were another line in her budget. My blood felt like ice water. Gooseflesh prickled up my arms. Eleanor was already gone, and now I was next, the final asset in her plan. That night, when the recording finally ended, I set the device down on the table. Its red light still blinked steadily in the dark, like a tiny lighthouse warning of rocks ahead. I knew then I was no longer just collecting evidence of theft. This had become a fight for survival. And every laugh, every whisper, every word she had uttered was now captured, sealed inside the cold memory of my recorder, waiting for the day it would be played back in a courtroom. That Wednesday morning, December 13th, I sat in my study with the blinds half drawn, the pale winter sun slicing through the slats. Its light fell across 5 glass jars lined up with military precision on the desk, each filled with the tainted coffee I'd pretended to drink. Beside them lay the small digital recorder, insignificant in size but holding a death sentence for Vanessa Reed Walker. Each jar was a mute witness, reminding me that time was running out. If I misstepped, I would become, in the eyes of the law, exactly what she was painting me to be. A senile old man, helpless and ready to be locked away. 2 days from now, Dr. Cole Harper, the neurologist Vanessa herself had selected, would give his verdict. 1 signature, 1 unchecked box, and I would legally vanish. The thought sent a sheet of cold sweat down my spine. If I appeared groggy, confused, just as she'd planned, he would sign the papers consigning me to memory care forever. But if I arrived sharp and lucid, she'd know her drug regimen had failed, and the trap would spring too soon. I needed something stronger than words and suspicions. I needed medical evidence, undeniable proof. I picked up the phone and forced my voice to stay level. "This is Franklin Walker," I said into the receiver. "I need a toxicology panel outside of my scheduled appointments. Discreet, comprehensive. Today, if possible." There was a pause on the other end, the sound of papers being shuffled. Then the nurse's voice came back, hesitant but firm. "Dr. Emily Carter can see you during her lunch break." In that instant, I felt like a drowning man whose fingers had finally brushed the edge of a lifeline. By noon, I was stepping into Dr. Carter's private testing room. It was a small, clean space, the fluorescent lights casting a stark white glow over her lined face. She looked at me like someone greeting an old student's sympathy mixed with skepticism. "Franklin," she said softly, "you look far too healthy for a man with advancing dementia." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Emily, I'm not losing my mind. I have a daughter-in-law with a pill grinder and an estate plan." Her eyes shifted from confusion to alarm as I laid out the 18-month timeline, the morning coffee ritual, the staged medical reports, the forced isolation. I saw her lips press into a thin line as she listened. "I need you to draw blood for a full panel," I told her. "Sedatives, tranquilizers, anything. And I need documentation proving my cognitive function is normal." Without a word, she rolled up my sleeve and filled 3 vials. The dry click of each tube locking into place sounded like another nail in Vanessa's coffin. Then came the cognitive tests. She gave me a string of numbers to recite backwards. I rattled them off easily and even managed a wry smile. "This is easier than remembering 300 student names in 1 semester," I joked. She handed me pattern recognition puzzles, and I completed them before she looked up from her clipboard. Finally, she set down her pen. "Franklin," she said, her eyes wide, "your results are in the 95th percentile for your age group. These are the scores of a clear, functioning mind, the exact opposite of what they've claimed about you." My chest loosened as she went on, voice turning grave. "If you feel foggy after your morning coffee, it's not grief. Someone is drugging you." For the first time in months, I felt a surge of weight lift off me. A witness had stepped into the light, and together we were about to drag Vanessa's darkness into the open. While waiting for the test results, I made my second critical decision. I drove to Best Buy that evening, sitting in the car for a few minutes before stepping out, my hands gripping the steering wheel like I was about to cross a moral line. Inside, I bought a small white Wise security camera no bigger than a golf ball, smooth plastic shell, its green indicator light blinking like a secret eye. Holding it, I felt its weightless frame in my palm. yet it carried the full weight of my hope for freedom. That night, after Vanessa left for Ethan's parent-teacher meeting with Michael, I quietly opened the box. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock. I wiped the dust off the kitchen shelf and tucked the camera neatly behind the bread box, adjusting the angle until I could see the coffee maker perfectly on my phone screen. Through that tiny lens, my kitchen transformed into a silent witness, a courtroom waiting for its first piece of evidence. The next morning, I descended the stairs slowly, dragging my hand along the railing as if unsteady. Every step was part of the act, every breath a performance meant for the lens. I shuffled into the kitchen a few minutes late, muttering softly as Vanessa began her usual morning routine. Then I retreated to my study, feigning confusion while the camera began its silent confession. 8:47 a.m. Vanessa entered the kitchen, humming lightly as she set the coffee mug down. 8:49 a.m. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small pill bottle. Her movements were quick, practiced. The back of the spoon flashed under the light as she crushed the tablets with mechanical precision. 8:51 a.m. The fine white powder slid into my coffee, swirling into the dark liquid before disappearing. She added a splash of cream, stirring with care, like an artist blending colors to hide her crime. 8:52 a.m. She lifted the cup, pasted on her tender smile, and walked toward my study. "Your favorite coffee, Dad," she said softly. I sat perfectly still, heart pounding, watching everything unfold live on my phone screen. The resolution was sharp enough to make my skin crawl. The familiar kitchen, our kitchen, now looked like a crime scene caught in real time. The faint clink of the spoon against the mug echoed like a judge's gavel. By noon, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read Dr. Emily Carter. My pulse spiked as I pressed accept. Her voice was calm but grave. "Franklin, your blood work came back. You have 2.3 milligrams of zolpidem in your system, a full clinical dose of Ambien, administered daily, for months." I tightened my grip on the phone, eyes shifting between the screen frozen on Vanessa's hands, stirring my coffee and the 5 glass jars glinting in the sunlight. My blood turned to ice, but my mind felt blazing clear. "Doctor." Carter hesitated for a beat, then added, her tone dropping lower, "With these results and the footage you've gathered, Franklin, this isn't just evidence. This is a conviction waiting to happen." I hung up slowly and looked toward the small camera still recording, its green light blinking steadily like a heartbeat in the dark. For the first time in months, the balance had shifted. The trap was closing not around me, but around Vanessa Reed Walker. That afternoon I became a clerk in my own indictment, methodical, precise, merciless. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open and started copying every file, one by one. The video clips, the audio tracks, the toxicology report, the timeline Vanessa had written, the forged medical forms, the bank statements. The keys clicked like a metronome. Each tap felt like the heartbeat of the case. I named every file by date and time so there could be no question later about when anything was recorded. When the digital copies were done, I printed a hard set. I laid the papers out on the table in neat stacks, video first, then audio transcripts, then medical documentation, then financial records, the newly printed ink smelling sharp in the room. I took photographs of the jars and the pill crusher, labeled each photo, and included them in the packet. I put one complete sealed set into my safe deposit box at First National and turned the dial twice, listening to the lock click like a promise. I affixed a paper seal and wrote the code on a slip of paper that I tucked away in a different place. I had taught my students the basics of chain of custody long enough to know how fragile proof can be if mishandled. At 4 in the afternoon, I drove to Susan Blake's office with a manila folder heavy in my arms. Susan looked up as I entered, eyebrows knitting together. "Franklin," she said, the warmth in her voice edged with concern. I placed the sealed envelope on her desk, and my hands did not tremble as I said, "If anything happens to me, if I'm suddenly committed or declared incompetent, open this envelope and call the police." She reached for the envelope, feeling the wax seal. Her face paled a fraction. "Franklin, you sound lucid. Completely lucid." she said, voice soft but steady. I let her see each document when she asked. I watched the skepticism melt into stunned silence as she read. The clips, the transcript, the lab numbers, the account history. She asked, almost reflexively, "Do you want me to send another copy to your brother?" I shook my head. "No, one copy here, one in the bank. Only you and Mark know until this is over." Back home, the ritual continued. I made 2 external hard drives and copied everything again, redundancies for redundancy's sake. I labeled the drives and slipped one into a padded envelope bound for my brother Mark in Chicago with a short note, "Open only if Franklin disappears." The other I left in the safe deposit box. In the envelope to Susan I included a list of specific instructions. Open the seal, call Detective Laura Bennett, freeze any transfers, and begin immediate steps to rescind any fraudulent power of attorney filings. I wrote emergency phone numbers, the safe code, and a checklist of evidence items so there would be no guesswork. Then I prepared for the scene I would perform the next day. Everything had to be staged with the precision of a play. I placed the digital recorder where its microphone would pick up a whisper but not be obvious near my heart under my sweater and checked the red light. I chose an old, soft sweater to wear, slovenly enough to appear lethargic, but not so disheveled that it would look convincingly out of control. I practiced my slurred lines in front of the mirror, small hesitations, the right spacing between words, a hand that trembled on command but not so much that it looked pathological. I told myself, quietly and fiercely, that my acting tonight was not for revenge. It was to buy the days I needed to live. The props were arranged, an empty coffee cup on the side table to make Vanessa believe I had been drinking normally, the recorder warm and blinking red in my pocket, the jars locked in the drawer with dates and sample numbers written on each lid. I tested sight lines and sound levels until the recorder's waveform looked healthy and the playback was intelligible. I wrote a short script in the margin of my notebook, small cues to remind me when to pause, when to murmur, when to cough, then tore the page free and tucked it into my pocket. That night I barely slept. I dozed in short bursts, waking at 3 a.m. to replay the steps in my head, to check the hard drives one more time, to run through the opening lines. I left the empty prop cup within sight so Vanessa would see it in the morning and assume she had succeeded. I rehearsed the part where I would slur and stumble just enough to prompt her to speak her rehearsed lines. Most important, I reminded myself of the legal playbook. Once the envelope was opened, Susan was to call Detective Laura Bennett immediately, stop any bank transfers, and secure the property title. I wrote that instruction in capitals inside the envelope. Call Detective Lauren Bennett, freeze accounts, block transfers. On the day, I gave them the performance they expected, a careful, convincing slippage into confusion. I took measured sips of coffee and let my words trip and smooth out exactly as practiced. But every one of Vanessa's responses, every little self-satisfied line she uttered, was being recorded, time-stamped, and safely stored in triplicate on external drives. I left Susan a letter with explicit directions, which files to play first, where to go for immediate freezing of assets, and the contact details for the county prosecutor. I typed out step-by-step legal actions she should take: open envelope, contact Detective Laura Bennett, obtain a temporary restraining order, submit evidence package to the district attorney, and reverse any transfers connected to Peterson Development or any entity linked to Vanessa Reed Walker. No assumptions, no delays, a blueprint to prevent any chance of a perpetrator buying time to cover her tracks. That evening, after double-checking the drives and sealing the spare envelope, I put the recorder back into my pocket and rehearsed once more, a last breath before curtain. I remember thinking, with a clarity that was almost gentle, give them the victory they crave, and then watch their words strangle them. I was calm enough to write that thought down and tuck it into the folder with the evidence. When I finally turned off the lamp, the house hummed with a strange new confidence. The evidence was duplicated, stored, and entrusted. The stage was set. The next day I would present them with the version of me they wanted, and that version would be the trap. I drained the entire cup of coffee, the bitterness clinging to my tongue like guilt. The drug Vanessa had slipped into it began to crawl through my veins, hammering behind my eyes like a freight train. My pulse slowed, the edges of the world blurred, but this time I wasn't afraid. I gripped the armrest of my chair until my knuckles turned white and whispered to myself, "Let it take hold, just not before the curtain rises." If I had to stumble to sell the illusion, I would stumble with purpose. The clinic was bright, sterile, and cold. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, throwing hard reflections on polished tile floors that smelled sharply of disinfectant, the same scent that had filled the rooms where Margaret once went through her treatments. I let my hand rest heavily on Vanessa's arm, letting her guide me like a helpless man. Inside my coat pocket, the red light of the recorder blinked steadily, the silent witness to everything that was about to unfold. Dr. Cole Harper was younger than I expected, mid-40s, hair combed neatly back, tie knotted to perfection, his face arranged into a professional calm that bordered on arrogance. He carried the air of a man who had heard 100 family tragedies and believed he already knew how each one would end. He didn't even look up as Vanessa introduced me. "Dr. Harper, this is my father-in-law, Franklin Walker," she said in her carefully modulated voice, the one she used for customer service calls and charity luncheons. "As I mentioned on the phone, his condition has worsened drastically." "Tell me about his symptoms," he said, still reading from a chart. "Memory loss, confusion, wandering," she replied smoothly. "Just yesterday he asked me 4 times what year it was. When we tried to help, he got aggressive." Vanessa's performance was flawless. Her voice trembled at the right syllables. Her hand rested gently on my shoulder, stroking once an imitation of compassion so convincing that even I almost believed it. Rage flared in my chest, but I forced my eyes to remain glassy, unfocused. My head sagged, lips moving in incoherent murmurs. Once, I lifted my gaze toward the far wall and muttered, "Where's Margaret?" just to see the flicker of triumph curve her mouth. Dr. Harper scribbled notes methodically, occasionally glancing between us with the detached sympathy of a man diagnosing a broken appliance. "Has he shown outbursts of anger?" "Oh yes," Vanessa breathed, her voice catching as though from exhaustion. "Just last week, he threw a cup of coffee at me, shouting that I was trying to poison him. A perfect lie, delivered flawlessly." Her voice cracked with rehearsed grief, a quiver so expertly timed it could have earned her an award. I slumped further in my chair, mumbling nonsense, my fingers twitching the image of decline she wanted so desperately to sell. The recorder caught every syllable. For 20 minutes, I became the role she had written for me. I forgot dates, lost track of names, asked the same question 3 times. Each time Dr. Harper nodded gravely and made another notation. I knew the act was working. The drug made it real enough to be believable. But behind the fog, I counted seconds. Every tick of the clock was another line of evidence being recorded. Finally, Dr. Harper capped his pen and sighed. "I'm afraid this confirms what you suspected," he said to Vanessa, not to me. "Moderate to severe cognitive decline. It would be best to arrange for placement in a memory care facility as soon as possible." Vanessa leaned forward, eyes wide in feigned concern. "How soon can we proceed, doctor? His safety is our first priority." "I can have the paperwork ready by Monday," he replied. "Shady Oaks has an excellent reputation." At the sound of that name, I let my head droop lower, feigning confusion. Inside, my heart pounded with grim satisfaction. Each word, decline, placement, facility, safety, etched itself into the recorder's memory. I didn't move, didn't blink, as Vanessa whispered the word she thought sealed my fate. "Perfect," she said softly. But the red light inside my coat was still blinking. Every syllable, every lie, every smug breath of hers was being captured, and one day soon, those very words would become the rope that cinched tight around her neck. Everything unfolded exactly as Vanessa had planned except for one thing. I had recorded every single lie. That night, while she and Michael were having dinner in the next room, I sat before my old laptop, the screen light flickering across my face as I dragged one file after another into neatly labeled folders. The faint whirring of the fan matched the rhythm of my pulse. Each click of the mouse was a cut through the web she had woven. I labeled the drives carefully. Evidence A, video. Evidence B, audio. Evidence C, blood work. Every frame, every timestamp, every recording of her voice saying the unthinkable. By midnight, I had 3 separate copies backed up. One went into my safe deposit box at First National, another was mailed to my attorney, Susan Blake. The last I sent to my brother, Mark, in Chicago, along with a short note. Open this, if I disappear. 18 separate mornings. 18 videos of Vanessa grinding pills into my coffee. Proof undeniable, systematic, cold-blooded. The most damning of all came on December 18th. I was pretending to nap in the recliner when she made another phone call. I shuffled around the living room, letting my eyes droop, my hands tremble, the perfect image of a doped-up old man. But the recorder in my pocket captured every syllable. Her voice floated through the quiet house, smooth and unguarded. "The commitment papers are signed," she said. "January 3rd, we'll drive him to Shady Oaks and walk away." A pause. "No, Michael doesn't know about selling the house. I told him we're just exploring care options. He thinks we'll visit every week and take Ethan on trips." Another pause, and then laughter, sharp, confident, cruel. "When Frank's locked up in Shady Oaks, he won't be our problem anymore. Michael can visit his senile father if he wants. I'll be popping champagne in Sarasota by March." Her words cut through me like ice. But what came next burned hotter than any poison. "Ethan will spend summers with us instead of wasting time in that frozen wasteland," she said. Ethan, my grandson, the only light left after Margaret passed. My hands clenched until my nails dug into skin. The thought of her stealing even him from me made my vision blur with rage. She went on, voice lowering to a whisper of satisfaction. "The best part is, it's all legal. I've got power of attorney, full access to his pension, and if he dies there, well, that's not the worst outcome. We'd inherit everything clean." She said it out loud, hoped I'd die while I sat less than 10 feet away, pretending to be asleep. 18 months of planning, she said, and soon it would all pay off. By then, I had heard enough. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers, but my voice was steady. "Detective Bennett," I said when the line connected. "This is Franklin Walker. I have a case one that's still in progress. It involves multiple felonies, elder abuse, fraud, and attempted homicide. And I am the living victim." Her tone sharpened. "Do you have evidence, Mr. Walker?" I opened the drawer beside me and stared at the stack of hard drives, the blood reports, the labeled jars, the videos. "I don't just have evidence," I said quietly. "I have a library of proof waiting to be seen." 24 hours later, I sat across from Detective Laura Bennett in her Minneapolis office. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and paper. I laid down the heavy manila folders, video stills, audio transcripts, toxicology results, bank statements, each piece arranged like a weapon. She flipped through the pages, her brow tightening. "Mr. Walker," she said finally, voice firm, "I've handled dozens of elder abuse cases, but never one this complete. Your daughter-in-law hasn't just broken the law, she's documented her own crimes in vivid detail." She paused, tapping her pen thoughtfully. "I want to arrest her immediately," she continued, "but I need you to wait until December 27th. "Why the delay?" I asked. Detective Bennett leaned forward. "Because Vanessa still has one last performance to give. Christmas morning, she's going to tell your family you're too unstable to stay home. She'll show them the commitment papers and play the hero who protected everyone from you. Would you like your family to hear her lies before we take her away?" I met her gaze and nodded slowly. "I want my son to know exactly who he married." Detective Bennett closed the file, drumming her fingers once on the folder's edge. "Then let her think she's safe," she said. "Let her gloat, let her play the saint. Come Christmas morning, every mask will fall, and we'll be standing there when the cuffs click shut." On December 23rd, Vanessa made her final mistake. She hurried in from the cold, dropped a fat, red-backed real estate packet on the kitchen counter, and rushed back out to run an errand. The pages lay there in a sloppy fan under the neon glare. On top, a purchase and sale agreement to Peterson Development Group. The price read, in bold print that felt like a blade pressed to my ribs, $850,000. The closing date, December 29th, 4 days after Christmas. She had sold the house Margaret and I had built our lives inside. What Vanessa didn't know was that I'd been busy too. Quiet calls made, arrangements set, lines already cast. She had chosen the wrong week to make her endgame move. Christmas morning, 2024. Vanessa woke early, humming as she cracked eggs and set bacon to pop in the pan, no doubt daydreaming about Gulf Light and Sarasota sand. She had no idea this would be her last morning outside a cell. "Coffee's ready, Dad," she called, bringing me the usual doctored cup with a healer's smile. I received it with practiced gratitude, lifted it to my lips, and only pretended to sip most of the poisoned brew bled invisibly into the thirsty soil of the potted plant beside my chair, the same plant that had been wilting for weeks under her chemistry. By 10 o'clock, Michael and Ethan arrived with wrapped boxes and careful smiles. My 12-year-old grandson wrapped his arms around me, the kind of hug you give someone you've been told is fading. "Hi, Grandpa," he whispered. "Mom says you haven't been well." "I feel better than I have in months," I told him, and watched the quick, sharp flash of Vanessa's eyes. "He's having one of his clear moments," she soothed to Michael, soft and practiced. They come and go. While the gifts were opened, Vanessa kept checking the time. She had a timeline to hit, papers to unveil, a family to persuade. At 11:30 she moved. "Michael, can we talk in the kitchen?" Ethan was absorbed in his new game. I rose and drifted after them, stopping just around the corner where the stove light painted the tile. "Your father had another episode Tuesday night," Vanessa began, tone weary and rehearsed. "He was wandering the neighborhood at 2 a.m. in his underwear. Mrs. Parker called me." A lie. At 2 a.m. Tuesday I was asleep beneath my own roof. "I didn't want to ruin Christmas," she continued, paper sleeves rasping as she drew out her stack. "But we can't wait any longer, Doctor. Cole Harper says Frank needs immediate placement." The sheets whispered. Incident reports, fall narratives, stove left on dramatics, each a fiction she'd typed into being. "Shady Oaks has a bed on January 3rd. I've completed all the forms." "Vanessa, this feels sudden," Michael said, his brow tight. "Look at the reports," she pressed, shuffling pages. "Violent outbursts, bathroom accidents, leaving the burners on 3 times in a row. I've been protecting you from how bad it's getting." "And the house?" Michael asked, voice barely above the kettle's hiss. "Of course we'll have to sell. Memory care is $4,800 a month, even with his pension and insurance. We'll need the equity to keep him safe." Her voice softened to a sympathetic murmur. "People like your father rarely live more than 3 to 5 years like this. At least he'll be safe and treated properly. Think of Ethan. Do you want him to remember his grandpa as a confused, irritable old man? Better to preserve the good memories." I stepped into the doorway. "And what good memories would those be, Vanessa? The one where you told the neighbors I had bathroom accidents? Or the one where you claimed I threw a mug at you?" Her face blanched. "Frank, you should rest." "Or maybe the loveliest memory of all," I said. "The one where you grind sedatives into my coffee every morning." Michael's gaze jumped between us. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I reached into my cardigan and placed a small recorder on the table. The click of the power button sounded like a gavel in the tiled room. A moment later, Vanessa's own voice poured out cold, precise, triumphant. "The beautiful thing is, it's all legal. Power of attorney for a feeble relative. The court will thank us for taking such good care of poor confused James." Michael went pale. "Vanessa, what is that?" I skipped ahead. Her voice again. "Once he's committed, we can visit twice a year and play the grieving family. In the meantime, we sell the house and move to Florida like we planned." "That's fabricated," Vanessa snapped, reaching for the device. "Frank is delusional, Michael." Another clip, and her whisper turned knife. "The meds work perfectly. Once he's locked up, we disappear." Michael stared at his wife as though meeting a stranger. "Vanessa, did you drug my father?" "Of course not," she said, too quickly. "This is exactly what I mean about his paranoia." I took out my phone and tapped the screen. On the display, clear as noon, Vanessa measured powder with the back of a spoon, stirred, then added cream to veil the taste. "December 18th, 8:49 a.m., I said evenly. "December 19th, same time. I have 18 separate videos, Michael. Your wife has been poisoning me systematically for a year and a half." Vanessa lunged for the phone. "Ridiculous, staged." "Don't touch him," Michael said, stepping between us, his voice suddenly hard. I laid a sealed envelope on the counter and slid out the toxicology report. Dr. Emily Carter ran a full panel, 2.3 milligrams of zolpidem in my blood, a full therapeutic dose every day, for months. Sweat purled along Vanessa's hairline. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under." He was depressed, barely functioning. The confusion, the memory problems grief was speaking. The medication kept him calm. "The medication almost erased me," I said quietly. "And you meant to lock me away so you could steal my home." Michael lifted another sheet from the counter commitment paperwork stamped with a date. "January 3rd, he read, voice numb. "And $950,000, I added, meeting his eyes. "Exactly what you'd get selling my house to Peterson Development." Silence spread through the kitchen until Ethan wandered in, clutching his game. "Why is everyone so quiet?" he asked. "And why is Mom crying?" "Because, kiddo," I said, laying a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes even the best liars run out of lies." I looked back at Vanessa. The room hummed with the refrigerator's motor, with the slow tick of the wall clock counting down the last seconds of her freedom. And the real surprise was already walking up our front steps. Michael stood frozen in the kitchen, commitment papers trembling in his grip, while Vanessa sobbed into her hands at the table. Ethan watched the adults as if the gravity in our house had suddenly doubled. "Vanessa," Michael said slowly, "how long have you been planning this?" I answered for her. 18 months since the day we buried Margaret." I flipped the clip on a thick manila folder and poured its contents across the wooden table. The kitchen's yellow light pooled over everything: envelopes, toxicology results, credit card statements laid out like a death board. I stacked each pile with a prosecutor's calm: the handwritten timeline, the bank statements, the dueling medical opinions, screenshots from the videos. Every stack a chess piece already placed in check. "Here is her timeline," I said, tapping Vanessa's neat, unmistakable script. December 26th file with the court. January 3rd commitment. January 15th POA hearing. February 1st close on the house. March 1st Florida. Michael read it, knuckles whitening on the table's edge. "You already put a deposit on a condo," I added. $20,000 paid with my stolen pension checks. Mascara streaked down Vanessa's cheeks. "You have no idea what it's like caring for him," she rasped. "The depression, the burden, it was all on me." I fanned out the bank printouts. "You siphoned $43,000 from my accounts this year. That isn't caregiving, that's embezzlement." I slid 2 reports side by side. Dr. Cole Harper's cognitive decline summary, built from Vanessa's monologue and a 20-minute pantomime, and Dr. Emily Carter's cognitive evaluation showing percentile 95 performance on every task, 3 days apart. 2 doctors, I said. 2 opposite conclusions. Care to guess which one Vanessa prepped? Michael's face darkened. "Harper never truly examined you, did he? He took her word for everything." "I was protecting everyone," Vanessa flared. "He frightened Ethan with his episodes." "What episodes?" Ethan blurted, bewildered. "Grandpa's fine. You're the one who says he's sick." I pressed the recorder and let another clip roll Vanessa's coached line from the Harper visit. "The paranoia is getting worse. Yesterday, he threw a coffee mug at me." "I have never thrown anything," I said evenly. But Vanessa needed violence incidents for the commitment hearing. Michael paced, assembling the pieces aloud. "The wandering at night never happened. The stove, fiction. Bathroom accidents, Invented. 4. With each lie, I said, I brought a counterweight. Audio, video, lab work. 18 months, catalogued, and dated. Why? Michael finally asked, voice raw. My father would have helped us if we'd only asked. He always has. The last of Vanessa's composure snapped. Help us? To do what, scrape by in this miserable house forever? Watch you break your back at the plant while other families live decently? I'm 34, Michael. I deserve better. Better than what? I asked softly. A family that loves you? A paid-off roof? A husband who works 60 hours a week to provide? Better than poverty, she shouted. Better than pretending his flimsy professor's pension and his dead wife's insurance will fix our lives. Ethan edged closer to me, instinct pulling him toward the safer fire. Mom, why would you say those things about Grandma Margaret? Vanessa looked away. Michael's voice was a low cut. We weren't living paycheck to paycheck. You burned through what I earned, and Dad's on things we didn't need. I slid the final set of papers across the grain. Photocopied card statements I had lifted from Vanessa's wallet. $15,000 on designer clothes and jewelry, $8,000 on spas, $6,000 on restaurants and entertainment charged to cards in my name, with my signature forged. Michael stared at the totals, throat working as if the numbers were made of grit. Vanessa reached for her purse and keys. I'm not staying here to be attacked by a senile old man and his enabler son. You're not going anywhere, I said, calm as a closing hymn. Detective Laura Bennett is waiting outside. She froze. What? I called the police 3 days ago. They're parked at the curb, waiting for my signal. 3 firm knocks answered the room. The air changed color. Through the front window I saw Vanessa's expression flicker panic, calculation, then a last defiant dare. I opened the door. Detective Bennett stood poised, a small woman in her 40s with the steady posture of someone who wrestles hard cases for a living. Behind her were Officer Ryan Cole and a crime scene photographer. Vanessa Reed Walker, Bennett said, metal clear. You are under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit involuntary commitment. This is insane, Vanessa hissed, backing toward the kitchen. Michael, tell them your father's delusional. You have the right to remain silent, Bennett continued, removing the cuffs. Officer, I am his primary caregiver. Vanessa threw up a final plea. He has severe dementia, and he's making baseless accusations. We've reviewed 18 months of evidence, Bennett said, nodding to the table. Video of you crushing pills into his coffee. Audio of you admitting to sedation. Medical records corroborating systematic poisoning. The photographer clicked the grinder lifted from the drawer for a close-up. The labeled glass vials of tainted coffee, the forged commitment forms glinting under the kitchen light. These recordings could be fabricated, Vanessa protested, voice climbing a frantic octave. Michael, you know I would never hurt your father. Bennett thumbed the recorder and let a single line spill into the air. Once he's inside, we can visit twice a year and play the grieving family. Vanessa's shoulders collapsed. That was taken out of context. Officer Cole tilted his head. In what context is drugging an elderly man acceptable? Michael finally spoke, hoarse and steady. Detective, I had no idea. Vanessa told me Dad was getting worse, that he needed professional care. Mr. Walker, Bennett said clearly, you are not under investigation. Our evidence shows both you and your father were deceived. Ethan stood silently at my side, eyes fixed on his mother as the cuffs flashed. She looked at him with pleading pain. He inched closer to me. Grandpa, he whispered, were you really sick? No, kiddo, I said. I was never sick. Your mom put drugs in my coffee that made me sleepy and confused. Why would she do that? Because sometimes adults make terrible choices about money, I answered, and squeezed his hand. Bennett read Vanessa her Miranda rights, while Officer Cole methodically documented the scene. The pill grinder rattled faintly as he set it down after the close-up. The labeled vials lined the counter like glass witnesses. The forged signatures on the commitment packet gleamed like fresh bruises. The county attorney will file formal charges tomorrow, Bennett told me. Elder abuse in the first degree, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and theft. The guidelines suggest 3 to 7 years. What about the sale of the house? Michael asked suddenly. I allowed myself a small smile, the first in 18 months. That's the funny part. Vanessa sold the house to Peterson Development, signing everything Tuesday while you were at work. Michael frowned. If the sale's legit, how can they stop her? Because, I said, Peterson Development is owned by my attorney, Susan Blake. It was a sting purchase, designed to stop Vanessa from profiting off her crimes. Bennett's eyebrows rose. A containment play. Smart. I knew she'd try to close before the arrest, I said. Susan formed a shell, made a lawful offer, and Vanessa signed the transfer, convinced she'd struck gold. Vanessa stared at me, horror widening her eyes. You can't do that. The house is legally mine under the POA. POA obtained through fraud and poisoning is void ab initio, Bennett replied evenly. Any downstream conveyance is suspended and subject to reversal in court. But we already paid the deposit, Vanessa cried. The Florida condo will be seized, I told her, voice level, along with everything else you bought with my stolen money. They turned her toward the door. She looked back one last time. You'll never be able to take care of yourself, she spat. You need me. I glanced at my son, my grandson, the officers who had treated me with plain dignity. Then I looked at Vanessa. The only thing I need, I said, is for you to stop poisoning me. The cuffs clicked shut, the car door thudded, and Vanessa Reed Walker disappeared from our lives. The house at last exhaled. The biggest surprise was still waiting in my study. The last lesson was about to begin. Vanessa spent Christmas night in the Hennepin County Jail, likely imagining her attorney would untangle a misunderstanding by morning. She had no idea that while she sat in a holding cell, I was on the phone setting in motion the calls that would finish what her own arrogance had started. On December 26th, at 9 o'clock in the morning, I drove with Michael and Ethan to my attorney's office. Susan Blake's suite was hushed, the air rich with polished oak and the clean scent of fresh paper. Beyond her window, a light snowfall sifted down, as if the sky were trying to bury the last year and a half of lies. Frank, Susan said, rising to greet us, the Peterson Development transaction is formally void as of this morning. Title returns to you. Good, I said. Now I want to sell it for real. I set a pale yellow manila folder on her desk, my hand trembling just enough to betray the weight of it. Inside were the contacts for the Alzheimer's Association of Minnesota and a single sheet I'd written by hand, in loving memory of Margaret Maggie Walker. Michael sat up straight, eyes rimmed red. He leafed through the draft deed like a man searching for one last loophole to keep his childhood walls standing. Ethan looked from me to the folder. Grandpa, does this mean your house will help other families? I nodded. Yes, kiddo. Your Grandma Maggie's house is going to become hope for people fighting the forgetting. I could almost picture Vanessa's face in the jail when she'd hear the sale she counted on had been unraveled hands, clawing through tangled hair, a barked demand for a lawyer that couldn't rescue someone who had slipped her own noose around her neck. Susan scanned the pages. The property is appraised at $950,000. After taxes, the charitable value to the association will be roughly $850,000. Perfect, I said. Maggie worried in her last months about what would happen to me, afraid I'd be alone and exposed. This is how I keep my promise that her leaving wouldn't be for nothing. I told them what I'd told myself the night before. In those last evenings, Maggie would pour tea, touch my wrist, and whisper, "You'll be all right, won't you?" I had said yes. Today I intended to prove it. As soon as we sign, Susan said gently, I'll record and convey. She glanced at me. Where will you live, Frank? I smiled. Sunset Manor. I'd walked its halls the day before. There was the faint smell of baking from the community kitchen and a chorus of muffled laughter from a domino table in the lounge. Independent apartments, a bulletin board layered with potlucks and a weekly poker night. The kind of place Maggie would have chosen for me, a roof with warmth and a door that still opened outward. Before the clock touched noon, Susan closed the file and pressed a red seal home. Title transferred. The house where Maggie and I had loved and grieved now belonged to the Alzheimer's Association of Minnesota, earmarked to fund research grants in Maggie Walker's name. Instead of loss, I felt a strange and steady peace, as if Maggie's hand had settled on my shoulder, approving. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the last piece clicked into place, the sham sale undone, the real sale given away, and my future moving forward, one honest signature at a time. The courtroom felt colder than the Minnesota winter outside. Fluorescent lights bounced off gray walls, sterile and unforgiving. Every echo of the judge's gavel sounded like a funeral bell tolling for the 18 months of lies Vanessa Reed Walker had spun. She stood before Judge Richard Hale, dressed in the same orange jumpsuit she'd slept in the night before. Her face was pale, her hair matted from a night on a jail cot. Her eyes darted across the room, searching for sympathy, but all she found were silent, steeled faces. "Your Honor," her public defender began, voice too soft for the gravity of the moment. "My client was a devoted caregiver to an elderly man suffering from advanced dementia." Judge Hale raised a hand, cutting him off. "Counselor, I've reviewed the evidence. The video recordings show your client systematically drugging the alleged victim. The audio files capture her confessing to an 18-month financial and medical fraud. The toxicology and medical reports prove that the victim, Mr. Franklin Walker, is cognitively sound and was never impaired until she made him so." For a moment, silence ruled the room. Vanessa's lower lip trembled. Then came the question that sealed her fate. "How does your client plead to charges of first-degree elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy?" The lawyer turned toward her. "Mrs. Walker?" Her voice cracked. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Judge Hale's expression hardened. "Bail is set at $50,000. Funds from stolen accounts are frozen. You will remain in custody." Her shoulders sagged. She glanced back at me one last time, eyes full of desperate appeal. After 18 months of poison and deception, I had no words left for her. Silence was my verdict. After the hearing, Detective Laura Bennett found me waiting in the courthouse hallway. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly as she handed me a folder. "Mr. Walker, the condo management company in Florida is cooperating. They'll refund Vanessa's $20,000 deposit as soon as the criminal case is resolved. Would you like the check sent to you?" I studied the paper, my own forged signature looped elegantly beneath hers. Then I shook my head. "No, donate it to the Elder Abuse Prevention Program. Let her fraud become someone else's salvation." Detective Bennett gave a faint smile. "That's poetic justice, Mr. Walker." That afternoon, Michael helped me pack for my move to Sunset Manor. Cardboard boxes lined the hall like tired soldiers ready to be retired. As he sealed the last one, he spoke what he'd been saying for weeks. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have known what she was doing." I rested a hand on his shoulder. "Son," Vanessa fooled doctors, police, half the neighborhood. She was good at lying. I lifted a framed photo of Maggie. "Your mother taught literature for 35 years. She always said, the fastest way to spot a liar is to look for the cracks in their story. Once I started listening clearly again, I realized you could drive a truck through Vanessa's." As we carried the final box to Michael's truck, a silver sedan turned into the driveway. A woman stepped out, heels clicking against wet concrete, her face twisted with anger and confusion. It was Linda Reed, Vanessa's sister, straight from Wisconsin. "Where's Patricia?" she demanded. "She was supposed to meet us in Florida this weekend to show us that new condo in Sarasota." Michael and I exchanged a glance. I adjusted my coat and faced her squarely. "She's been delayed," I said evenly, "for about 3 to 7 years, depending on sentencing." Linda blinked, lost between disbelief and dawning horror. I added, softly but without pity, "The only property your sister's touring anytime soon has 4 walls, a steel door, and a number on it." Inside the house, Ethan was tucking a family photo into a small box. "Grandpa," he asked, "why does everyone look so sad?" "Because," I told him gently, "sometimes the truth doesn't save people, it exposes them, and that's the gift I gave your grandmother's memory this Christmas." Outside, snow kept falling as the moving truck pulled away. Behind me, the house stood quiet, emptied of lies, filled only with the sound of justice settling into its rightful place. The courtroom was silent enough to hear the hum of the ceiling lights when Judge Richard Hale began to speak. His voice carried the weight of finality, measured, grave, and absolute. I sat in the gallery beside Michael, every word from the bench falling like the echo of a gavel striking the coffin of Patricia's illusions. 4 years in state prison, Judge Hale declared, $50,000 in restitution, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with the victim, Mr. Franklin Walker, or his grandson, Ethan Walker. Vanessa's shoulders trembled. She clasped her hands together tightly, her knuckles whitening as the sentence settled over her like a shroud. When she heard the words permanent restraining order, her eyes darted wildly around the courtroom as if searching for an escape that no longer existed. But every door was closed. Every lie had been sealed behind the bars awaiting her. Your actions, Judge Hale continued, constitute one of the most deliberate and cruel forms of elder abuse this court has seen. You systematically poisoned a grieving widower, stole his savings, and sought to have him institutionalized for your personal gain. The bailiff guided her away, her orange jumpsuit stark under the harsh light. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes, not the manipulative kind she wielded like a weapon, but the raw terror of a woman who had run out of words to twist. That same week, Michael filed for divorce, ending 12 years of marriage reduced to ashes and deceit. Custody of Ethan was granted fully to him. Patricia would have only supervised visitation years from now, after she served her sentence. Ethan didn't ask many questions. One afternoon he sat beside me, legs swinging, his voice small but steady. "Grandpa," he said, "now I can visit you without being scared, right?" I smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, kiddo. No more secrets. No more lies." From my apartment at Sunset Manor, I could see the tulip garden just beginning to bloom under the early spring Sunday. The air smelled faintly of baked bread from the communal kitchen downstairs, and the laughter of residents drifted through the hallway like music. On Sundays, Ethan came over to read beside me, his laughter filling the quiet corners that had once echoed with sorrow. Sometimes, I caught myself glancing toward the empty chair beside me, the one where Margaret Maggie Walker used to sit. I imagined her smiling, watching her grandson's head rest against my arm as we read the same old stories she once shared with Michael 40 years ago. The light in the room felt softer then, as if she were still there, turning the pages with us. The tulips swayed in the sunlight like gentle applause. 3 days a week, I volunteered at the Alzheimer's Association of Minnesota, speaking with families who feared the same fate I once faced. Each time I told my story, I saw recognition in their eyes, the quiet terror of those who love someone vulnerable. But I also saw hope when they realized that justice could prevail, and that truth, once revealed, could free not only the victim but generations after. The donation from Eleanor's house, our family home, had already funded new early detection programs and research grants. Her name now appeared on a brass plaque in the association's main hallway, in loving memory of Margaret Maggie Walker for those who still remember. Every time I passed it, I felt her presence, proud and at peace. Vanessa will be released in the year 2029. By then, Ethan will be 16, old enough to understand who his mother truly was and who she chose to become. Some people believe revenge is about rage, about striking back, but I've learned the sweetest revenge is quieter, it's peace. It's waking up each morning clear-minded, surrounded by love instead of fear. It's laughter in place of manipulation, memory instead of confusion. Justice was served, Maggie's memory was honored, and as I sit here beneath the warm sunlight of Sunset Manor, I realize the truth I'd waited my whole life to understand. To live well is the most exquisite form of justice there is.